It was a bright, scorching afternoon in Lagos, with the sun glaring down on the streets, casting long shadows on the cracked sidewalks. The streets were as busy as ever, with honking horns from the constant flow of traffic and the distant cries of hawkers selling fresh oranges and coconut water. In one of the quieter neighborhoods of Surulere, a modest house stood on the corner, its walls peeling but still maintaining an aura of strength. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of cooking, spicy jollof rice mixed with fried plantains and freshly fried fish. Adaobi, a strong-willed woman in her early 40s, moved around her kitchen with the grace of a woman who had mastered the art of feeding her family. But today, her mind was elsewhere. Her son, Chijioke, had been unusually quiet for the past few days. At 16, he had become more distant, withdrawn into the world of his teenage troubles, refusing to share anything with her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had always prided herself on being a good mother. She worked hard as a secretary at a local law firm, sending Chijioke to one of the better schools in Lagos. She made sure he had everything he needed, and even though their life was not luxurious, she ensured he never went hungry or felt neglected. Yet, as the days passed, she began to notice subtle changes in his behavior. Chijioke, once full of life and laughter, now kept to his room, his music blaring through the walls as if to shut out the world. The boy she once knew seemed to be slipping away, and Adaobi couldn't stand the thought of it. She had tried talking to him, but he brushed her off, saying, "Mama, I'm fine, leave me alone." But today, everything was about to change. It was after lunch, and Adaobi had just finished washing the dishes when she noticed something unusual. Chijioke's phone was lying on the kitchen table. He never left his phone unattended. The phone had been a point of tension between them for the last year. He was constantly on it, messaging his friends, playing games, watching videos. Every time she asked to see what he was doing, he quickly pulled it away, claiming it was his private space. This time, however, the phone was unlocked. Adobe's heart raced as she picked it up. She was not the type of woman to snoop, but the anxiety gnawing at her told her something was off. She unlocked the screen, and as soon as the messages opened, she froze. The words on the screen were enough to make her stomach churn. Chinonso, I think I'm pregnant, Chiji. I don't know what to do. There it was. The shocking realization hit her like a thunderclap. She felt her body stiffen, her mind racing to understand what she had just read. The words blurred before her eyes as she scrolled further, the text becoming more and more intimate, filled with talk of missed periods and fears of family reactions. Her son had a baby or was about to. Adaobi's legs went weak, and she had to grip the table to steady herself. She had raised Chijioke to be a good boy, to respect women and make responsible decisions. How had he allowed himself to be in this kind of situation? She felt both anger and confusion well up inside her. But above all, she felt betrayed. She had failed him somehow, failed to guide him through this crucial stage in his life. The house, once a safe haven of familiar smells and warm conversation, now felt like a foreign place. Her mind was in turmoil, and all she could think about was how to face her son. But Chijioke didn't come home that day. He didn't return until late in the evening, and by that time, Adaobi had sat in silence for hours, turning over the conversation she knew they had to have. When he walked through the door, his usual energy was missing. His eyes avoided hers as he slipped his shoes off and made his way toward his room. "Chijioke!" Adaobi called out, her voice firm but shaking. "Come here!" He froze, then slowly turned around. His eyes were full of fear, his lips trembling as though he knew exactly what was coming. Adaobi stood in the middle of the room, her hands on her hips. "We need to talk." Chijioke stood before his mother, his body tense, as if bracing himself for something catastrophic. The usual boyish charm that he carried like a shield had vanished, leaving behind a confused, almost scared teenager. He had always been the type to smile his way out of trouble, but today, his smile was gone. His face was pale, and the usual cockiness he displayed around his friends and classmates was replaced by guilt. Adaobi crossed her arms, glaring at him, her heart heavy with a mix of emotions. She had spent the last few hours wondering how to approach the conversation, but now, with her son standing there, everything seemed to go out the window. She had been a mother for so long, and yet this moment felt like a foreign land she had never navigated. "What is this?" Adaobi asked, holding up the phone. "What is going on, Chijioke?" Chijioke swallowed hard. His eyes were locked on the floor, unable to meet his mother's gaze. "Mama, I'm sorry." "Sorry?" Adaobi's voice cracked. "Sorry for what, Chijioke? For getting a girl pregnant?" At this, his eyes shot up, and for the first time he seemed to truly look at her, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Mama, I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't know what I was doing. It was just, it's just so complicated now. I don't know how to fix it." Adobe's heart broke as she watched her son struggle to speak the words she knew he was terrified to say. She had raised him, had spent so many sleepless nights worrying over his future, only for him to end up in a situation like this. "Complicated?" she echoed, her voice rising with frustration. "You think this is complicated? This is your life, Chijioke. This is someone else's life too. You can't just fix it. This is not some mistake you can sweep under the rug." Chijioke's eyes filled with tears as he tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. He had never seen his mother so angry, so disappointed. For the first time, he realized how much she had sacrificed for him and how much he had failed her. "I'm scared, Mama. I don't know what to do. What if she keeps the baby? What if she doesn't?" His voice shook. "What if she tells everyone?" Adobe's eyes softened as she stepped closer to him. She could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear she had once seen in her own mother's eyes when she was forced to make tough decisions. She placed her hand on his shoulder, guiding him to sit on the couch. "We're going to talk about this, okay? But you have to listen, and you have to promise me that you won't run from this. You're a young man now, Chijioke, and you have to start taking responsibility for your actions." Chijioke nodded, his body trembling, the weight of his mistakes now fully on his shoulders. Over the next few weeks, Adaobi took Chijioke to speak with Chinonso's family. The girl was just as young, barely 18, but already carrying the heavy responsibility of a child. Adaobi had been hesitant at first, but the more she spoke to Chinonso's mother, the more she realized that this situation wasn't just about her son. It was about two families coming together to find a solution, something that could prevent even more heartache. Chinonso's mother, Ngozi, was a soft-spoken woman, but there was strength in her eyes. She had raised her daughter well, but she had also made mistakes in her own past. Her own marriage had been fraught with struggles, and she understood the complexities of what was happening between Chijioke and Chinonso. "Mama Adaobi, I know this isn't easy for you," Ngozi said, sitting across from her with a sigh. "It's not easy for any of us, but we can work together to ensure that these two kids do the right thing for themselves and for the baby." The conversation was long, filled with uncomfortable silences, but it was also filled with a sense of hope. They agreed to help their children face the realities of their actions, and though neither Adobe nor Ngozi knew what the future would hold, they knew that the first step was taking responsibility. Adobe had done what she never thought she would have to do, face the truth of her son's actions. And though it broke her heart to see him in this situation, she promised herself that she would support him, as any mother would, to ensure he learned from his mistakes and grew into a man who could face the challenges of life with the strength and wisdom she had always wanted for him. As months passed, Chijioke began to take responsibility for his actions. He helped Chinonso with her prenatal checkups and began attending fatherhood classes to prepare himself for the baby. Adaobi, though still heartbroken by the situation, continued to support her son, guiding him through the steps of maturity. She watched with pride as he grew from the careless boy he had been into a more thoughtful young man. Adaobi knew the road ahead would be difficult for both of them, but she had faith in her son's ability to rise above his mistakes. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Chijioke had learned the hard way that actions have consequences, and together With the support of their families, they would navigate the challenges ahead. The months following Chijioke's confession were filled with moments of growth, tension, and emotional discovery. Adaobi spent sleepless nights replaying the conversations she had had with her son and the promises she had made to herself as a mother. Her heart was still heavy with disappointment, but it was also filled with a mother's unwavering love and an unshakable resolve to ensure that her son became the man she had always hoped for. Chijioke, on the other hand, felt like he was living in the shadows of his past mistakes. Every time he walked into the house, there was an invisible weight on his shoulders. The pictures of his late father that hung on the walls seemed to mock him, as though they were silently judging his failure. He had always seen himself as the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. But now, his life had taken a sharp turn. His thoughts were consumed by what he had done, what it meant for his future, and how to balance the demands of family, school, and impending fatherhood. Adaobi noticed the change in him. He was no longer the carefree teenager who would laugh off his mistakes. Chijioke was maturing quickly, but there were days when the burden of his actions seemed to be too much for him to bear. He began to withdraw even more, isolating himself in his room when he wasn't at school or attending his fatherhood classes. Adaobi knew that her son needed more than just words of encouragement. He needed someone who would help him channel his pain into something constructive. One afternoon, as she prepared lunch in the kitchen, Adaobi found herself staring out the window. The sounds of the busy neighborhood outside seemed so distant to her. The voices of the market vendors, the children playing in the streets, the rhythmic honking of taxis. It all felt far away, like a world she no longer belonged to. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps approaching. It was Chijioke. "Mama, can we talk?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. Adaobi turned to face him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. She nodded, setting aside the pot she was stirring. "Come, sit with me," she said, gesturing to the table. Chijioke hesitated before pulling out a chair and sitting down. His eyes were red, as though he hadn't been sleeping well. Adaobi's heart tightened at the sight of him, her strong, confident boy, now sitting there like a young man who had been burdened with a mountain of responsibility. "Mama, I don't know what I'm doing anymore," he began, his voice wavering. "I feel like I've messed up everything. I'm scared I'll never be enough, that I'll never be able to make things right." Adobe walked over to him and placed her hand on his shoulder, her voice gentle yet firm. "Chijioke, no one is perfect, but this is not the end of the world. You made a mistake, yes, but you still have a chance to do better. The road ahead may not be easy, but it's not impossible." Chijioke's eyes welled with tears. "But what if I fail? What if I can't do this? What if I can't be a good father to this child? I'm not ready for this." Adaobi took a deep breath, her heart aching for her son, but her words were clear and resolute. "You will never be fully ready. No one ever is. But I'll be here for you, and so will Chinonso's family. This child needs you, and you can do this. It won't be easy, but I believe in you, Chijioke. I've always believed in you." For the first time in months, Chijioke looked up at her, a faint smile forming on his lips. "Thank you, Mama," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't know what I'd do without you." In the weeks that followed, Chijioke began to take more initiative in his life. He attended his fatherhood classes diligently, learning the basics of caring for a newborn, how to change diapers, how to bathe the baby, how to handle sleepless nights. He was still overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation, but his resolve had begun to solidify. He had a responsibility now, not just to Chinonso, but to the child he had helped create. Adaobi watched as her son changed before her eyes. She had always known he had a strong character, but she had never imagined it would take such a life-altering event to bring it to the forefront. It was as if the boy she had raised had transformed into a man overnight. She could see the weight in his shoulders, but there was also a quiet strength in his determination to do what was right. One evening, After a long day of work, Adaobi came home to find Chijioke sitting on the porch with Chinonso. The two of them were laughing softly, sharing a quiet moment together as the sun set behind them. The warmth of the evening, coupled with the quiet joy they shared, reminded Adaobi of a time when things were simpler, before the complications of adulthood had begun to weigh on her son. She approached them slowly, taking in the sight of the young couple, both so young, yet both carrying the responsibility of their actions with a sense of maturity that belied their years. Good evening, Mama! Chijioke greeted her with a smile, standing up to greet her. Chinonso, who was seated beside him, gave Adaobi a shy wave. Good evening, my children! Adaobi replied warmly, though there was still an underlying sense of weariness in her voice. She had come to accept the reality of the situation, but it was still difficult to let go of the fears that clung to her. Chinonso stood up, and Adaobi could see the faint bulge of her belly. She was already 4 months pregnant, and the baby was becoming more real with each passing day. Mama, I just wanted to thank you for everything, Chinonso said, her voice soft and sincere. I know this is not what either of us expected, but I promise you that we will take care of the baby. Adaobi looked at her, seeing the earnestness in her eyes. She was young, yes, but there was a quiet strength about her as well. I hope you both do, Adaobi replied, her tone slightly more open than before. This is not going to be easy, but we are all in this together. We will support each other. And in that moment, as she stood there watching her son and his girlfriend, Adaobi realized something important. This was a turning point. Her son's life would never be the same, and neither would hers. But perhaps this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where they could all work together to break free from the past and create a new future. The months continued to pass, and with each day, Chijioke and Chinonso grew more accustomed to their new reality. They attended prenatal appointments together, learning about what it would take to raise a child. Chijioke continued to work hard at school, though the demands of fatherhood began to interfere with his studies. Adaobi, understanding the challenges he faced, offered him her full support, even helping him with his assignments when he needed it. Despite the support, the family knew that it was still a long road ahead. They had to prepare not just for the physical arrival of the baby, but for the emotional and financial responsibilities that would come with it. Adaobi had set aside money for the baby's essentials, and she had even begun to help Chijioke find a part-time job to support himself and Chinonso. Nkechi, Adaobi's best friend from childhood, had been a constant source of advice and support throughout this period. She had raised her own children in the face of difficulties, and her wisdom was invaluable. She would visit every weekend, offering advice and helping Adaobi manage the emotional load of the situation. One day, as they sat together on the porch, Nkechi turned to Adaobi with a knowing smile. You've done well, Adaobi. I've watched you and I can see how much Chijioke is learning. He'll be alright in time. Adaobi sighed, looking out into the distance. I hope so, Nkechi. It's been hard to accept, but I know he'll be alright. I just wish I could have shielded him from this, from the pain. You can't protect him from everything, my friend, Nkechi replied gently. All you can do is teach him how to stand up when life knocks him down. Adaobi smiled softly. Thank you, Nkechi. You've always been there for me. And in that moment, Adaobi knew that, despite the unexpected turns life had taken, she was not alone. She had her family, her friends, and her son by her side. Together, they would face whatever came their way. The day the baby was born, Chijioke and Chinonso looked more like parents than teenagers. Their lives had changed completely, and Adaobi couldn't help but feel a rush of emotions as she watched them hold their newborn daughter for the first time. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft cries of the baby and the murmur of voices as they marveled at her tiny fingers and toes. Chijioke looked down at his daughter, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. I can't believe she's really here, he whispered. Adaobi stood by the door, watching her son become a father, and in that moment, her heart swelled with pride. She had feared for her son's future, but now she saw a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of something new for their family. Chinonso looked up at her with tears in her eyes. Thank you, Mama Adaobi, for everything. Adaobi smiled and nodded, her heart full. This is just the beginning, my daughter. You both have a long road ahead, but I believe you'll make it. And with that, as the baby's cries filled the room, Adaobi knew that no matter what the future held, their family had the strength to face it together.